and a couple of Iranian drones attacked the United States Embassy in Saudi Arabia. The attack caused a small fire.
For those of us who follow geopolitical news, for years, we have been well aware of the supposed Cold War between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I say supposedly because we've seen news like this. Saudi Arabia claims to have intercepted drones that targeted its Ras Tanura oil refinery. And Riyadh's response has been,
Saudi Arabia tells its Gulf allies to avoid any steps that would increase tensions with Iran.
well, a couple of verbal protests, yes, but not a direct confrontation, despite direct attacks on the Saudi capital and the Ras Tanura refinery. If this had happened about 5 years ago, would I be preparing a video about the possible war fronts between the two great powers of Islam, Iran and Saudi Arabia? But since obviously the situation has changed, today we're here to answer the following question. Why is the main petro-monarchy standing idly by in the midst of a perfect opportunity to take down one of its greatest enemies? Are you interested? So stay until the end of the video. The rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran is as old as the Iranian Revolution itself. Back in '79, the Iranian revolutionaries, led by the Ayatollah, made specific calls to the rest of the Muslim world for the overthrow of Islamic monarchies, including the House of Saud. This alarmed Riyadh, which at the time was experiencing continuous economic growth thanks to black gold, and which always maintained cordial relations with the United States, being in fact one of its main oil suppliers. You know, before fracking, which brings a lot of economic growth but does little to help the environment and the healthcare system. The religious rivalry is also inherent. As you may know, Islam is mainly divided into two branches: Sunni Islam, which recognizes Abu Bakr, the closest companion of Muhammad, as the first caliph, and Shia Islam, which holds that Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, was his rightful successor. Saudi Arabia is then the main Sunni power, safeguarding the holy places like Mecca and Medina, while Iran is its counterpart in the Shia branch. And so, this enmity escalated into other areas. Over the decades, Saudi Arabia and Iran have been competing for regional hegemony, especially regarding the control and influence over global oil markets. As for geopolitics, that was obviously not going to be missing either. While the Iranians have had the traditional support of China and Russia, the Saudis have had the same from the United States and the West. Some of the key breakups happened in 1980. During the war between Iran and Iraq, Saudi Arabia provided financial support with loans and aid to Saddam Hussein's regime, which helped sustain this war for almost 8 years. Which, by the way, was more useless than elections in North Korea in '87. Some clashes between Iranian citizens, Shiites, and the Saudi police during a pilgrimage in Mecca left a toll of 400 dead and a total breakdown of relations. 2011. During the protests in Bahrain, in the context of the Arab Spring, the demonstrators were supported by Iran, while Saudi Arabia intervened directly in favor of the government. That same year, the civil war broke out in Syria. Iran provided military and financial support to the government of Bashar al-Assad, and Saudi Arabia did the same with several opposition factions, alongside the United States. 2016. Saudi Arabia executed the Shia cleric Nin al-Nin, who was accused of sedition and terrorism. Response from Iranian masses included protests that involved the attack and burning of the Saudi embassy in Tehran. Saudi Arabia broke off relations with Iran, expelled Iranian diplomats, and suspended flights and bilateral trade. But the peak of the rivalry between Riyadh and Tehran occurs during the civil war in Yemen. Technically, this is a conflict that is still ongoing between the legitimate government, which has the direct military support of Saudi Arabia, and the Houthi rebels, one of the main members of the famous Axis of Resistance. By the way, the Houthis still control much of Yemen's western coast, including the outlet to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, from where multiple attacks supported by Iran have been launched since the start of the war in Gaza. You see how everything in geopolitics is interconnected. Even though Iran has denied supporting the Houthis, who have been causing more than one headache for the Saudis for over a decade, what can I say? We sometimes pretend, but it rarely works out for us.
For business, my morals in exchange for money. China, honestly, is a very interesting trade partner, but I'm not going to do business with China. That doesn't require anything. I'm not going to do business with any communist.
And this is where the big part comes in. However, in March 2023, both countries announced the restoration of diplomatic relations after 7 years of rupture. The great mediator, none other than the Asian giant,
Iran and Saudi Arabia announced the re-establishment of their diplomatic relations. The news caused surprise and looks of distrust in Western diplomacy because of the third country that signed the agreement, China.
So, China did it to present itself as a peacemaker, not exactly for selfless reasons. As we saw in the previous video, China wants to secure its energy supply, since 50% of its oil comes from the Strait of Hormuz, the one that could be closed by war. Yes, the one that Winnie the Pooh wants to avoid at all costs. On the other hand, China achieved something that the United States hasn't been able to do in years. To bring two historic rivals to the same table, presenting itself as a global diplomatic power and gaining influence in the Middle East. Something that really bothered Trump, since we all know about the economic and political competition between the two great superpowers. And what does the Orange president think about his great rival? Well, Donald, what's your opinion on relations with China? Returning to the main topic of the video, although things have relatively calmed down since the mediation made in China, it's not like the tension has disappeared. Saudi Arabia, like any emerging power, is still seeking to position itself as the main power in Islam. The destruction of the Ayatollah regime, which could be accelerated if they intervene in the conflict, would demonstrate strength and a firm hand by the House of Saud, and, in addition, would mean the disappearance of their main rival. Without the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, or the Shia militias in Iraq, Saudi Arabia would position itself as the great hegemon of the Islamic world in the Middle East. On the economic front, Riyadh would establish itself as the undisputed leader of Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries without any rival country to hinder its decisions. Furthermore, an Iran that produces less, whether due to instability or sanctions, translates into higher global oil prices. With a lower supply, the price of their sales is higher. Higher tax revenues for the House of Saud, which would strengthen its economy, and the funding of its major state project, Vision 2030.
Agenda 2030.
Vision 2030. Vision, not Agenda 2030, with which it aims to diversify its economy and reduce its dependence on oil. Despite all this that I've told you, the cost of a military response that would lead to a regional escalation, no matter what, is simply unbearable for Saudi Arabia, and it outweighs the potential benefit. I'll tell you why. Let's revisit the concept from the end of the last chapter. Saudi Vision 2030 is a project to reduce the country's dependence on oil, diversify its economy, attract foreign investment, and develop other sectors such as tourism and healthcare. Because even the dumbest person knows that black gold is the main and greatest reason for the wealth of Saudi Arabia and the other petromonarchies. The 2030 project began in April 2016, and the results so far have been crap. By 2018, almost 80% of the country's total exports were crude oil, gas, and refined petroleum. By 2024, it was 72.1%. So the results haven't exactly been very encouraging, to say the least. Although this project did have some successes in the proposed social reforms. We've already seen that economic diversification hasn't made significant progress, and that foreign investment hasn't come in at the necessary scale. The Saudis have been such poor administrators, let's say more than poor administrators, they just couldn't help themselves. In 2018, a Saudi dissident, Jamal Khashoggi, was murdered. You know, autocrats don't like it when journalists remind them how autocratic they are. This led to an outflow of $650 million in foreign investments that same year. Although they resumed a few years later, it was a setback that could have driven away some more investments. In addition, for the social projects of Vision 2030 to work, it was necessary for oil prices to rise, their main source of income throughout their history. And right then, one of their most traditional allies, Orange Price, had been pressuring Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries to increase production and thus lower the price per barrel. You know, more supply means prices drop. Therefore, Saudi Arabia found itself caught between investing in its diversification and maintaining good relations with the big boss of the world. And because of this, the income they were getting was now lower. Because the price per barrel changed for them, it stayed lower than expected. During all this time, they had to invest most of it in their oil industry to keep producing. Finally, they chose the second option anyway. 72% of Saudi exports still depend on oil. A vicious cycle after which, although some diversification has been achieved, especially in the domestic market, black gold is still the undisputed king in the Saudi economy, 9 years after the project was launched and 4 years before its completion. But Sebas, this video is about the Iran war. Why focus so much on the Saudi economy? You're starting to bore me. Here's the answer to the video's question. Saudi Arabia keeps refraining from attacking Iran despite the aggressions because a regional war could leave the Saudi economy in ruins for two main reasons. I'll tell you first, the bad one or the catastrophic one. Better the bad one, so we can start warming up. The bad one is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which we all know is Iran's big ace up its sleeve, and which it is already starting to carry out partially. Even without the military responses from the attacked petromonarchies, it turns out that to send products to their main buyers, China, India, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, or Thailand, they absolutely have to go through the Strait of Hormuz. But Sebas, don't be so dramatic. They can use their east-west pipeline to transport the crude oil through the port of Jambu, with an outlet to the Red Sea. The three main problems with this alternative are, first, that shipping costs go up. Second, the capacity of this pipeline is 5 million barrels per day, while Saudi production is almost 8 million barrels per day. Third, the shipments that leave from the port of Jambu would have to pass through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is under the control of
the British economy and the British. They are involved in the aggression in our country.
Of the Houthi rebels represented by this spokesperson whose name no one knows, but whom we all remember now. The catastrophic reason is the destruction of the infrastructure. Pay attention to this map. The vast majority of oil fields and refineries are located right in the Persian Gulf, just a few kilometers from the coast of Iran. If the new Ayatollah goes crazy in the middle of a regional war and attacks these critical points, the Saudis are definitely in trouble. It's more than enough if they do it correctly at their refineries. The Ras Tanura refinery, which was unsuccessfully attacked on March 2nd, has been temporarily shut down amid ongoing escalation. Its refining capacity is 550,000 barrels per day, and it is located right at the exit of the Persian Gulf. If this happens, we would enter into an unprecedented domino effect. The refining capacity for both the domestic and external markets is lost. Crude exports from its terminal are interrupted without refining, and now it will be Saudi Arabia that will start importing crude. Tax revenues plummet dramatically, the Vision 2030 project collapses. Unable to finance it, they are forced to continue increasing military spending and reconstruction of the facilities. They pay extra logistical costs for the alternative routes, and so everything goes down the drain. So apparently, Prince bin Salman is choosing pragmatism rather than letting himself be carried away by the emotions that must arise. After seeing your great rival attack your territory, the big question is, how much longer will he hold back? Do you think Riyadh, facing pressure from Iran and likely the United States, will enter the war? Do you think the non-Ayatollah is capable of closing the Strait of Hormuz and continuing to attack the refineries of the petromonarchies? Don't forget to leave your comment and see you next time.